Today I'm joined by the author of the new book, Little Bosses Everywhere, How the Pyramid Scheme Shaped America. The author is Bridget Reed. Bridget, thank you for talking with me.
Thanks for having me.
So my first question that I want to ask you about this book is, given your background as a features writer and journalist, why MLM for the topic of a book?
Yeah, I mean, this has become an easy question for me to answer. It has to be book length if you want to get into the full story of MLM. And to me, this is what I discovered in reading articles about MLM. For example, there was one that I've read many times that's a 2021, so very recent, like op-ed about MLM being scammy. It's very negative op-ed. But when it describes MLM, it describes it as, people making sales and people taking a cut of sales for many, many reasons that your viewers will find, very familiar. That's not correct. It's not about sales at all. It's about purchases. And, I could see as a journalist why, when you have 1,200 words, even 3,000 words, it's just not enough to explain what's going on, how long it's been around. When people say, why is this legal? You need to go back to the 70s. So even like, say, longer features articles about like Herbalife during the Bill Ackman Herbalife thing, when, the Wall Street Journal or Forbes, they were doing feature stories, which are like 5,000, 7,000 words, long magazine articles, they still weren't getting it. That's what you have to do constantly as a journalist, is you have to triage the information that you don't need. And I could see why constantly the real story was being triaged, because once you look down the barrel, and anyone like you who has really looked at MLM, you go, oh my God, this thing is so big, its roots are so deep. And so I could see how, when you're writing a traditional story or making a documentary or 60 minutes, frankly, like, you do have to, even if you're trying to be negative, or excuse me, I should say, trying to be truthful, which to me is quite negative truth about MLM, you have to dismiss so much. So a book is really the length that it feels appropriate to tell the story of MLM. Like, in what other form can you go from the 30s to now? You need basically 100 years. And so a book became the thing that allowed me to go deep, deep, deep on MLM.
Yeah, that's true. I agree that it needs multiple hours of documentary or a book or a series of books even. But aside from the medium which you chose to use, which was a book, why did you personally come to settle on the topic of MLM for the book?
Sure. I had written this short article for The Cut, which is part of New York Magazine where I work. That's where I used to primarily write articles. Now I work at Curbed, which covers housing, which is a similarly scammy, an industry full of scams. So I've been covering scams for a while. But MLM to me was like this perfect soup during the pandemic of everything that was breaking all around us. It was a type of income producing activity, right? Because it's not real work, that had this like small business entrepreneurial rhetoric to it that seemed completely false. It was almost like observing like an informal economy. Like I compared it to like a squeegee guy on the street. Like, that's what it looks like when you're scrolling through Instagram and you're looking at like the free car hashtag, and you're looking at these like random people in these little towns posting about their cars. And to think that that is what powered the wealth of a family like the DeVos family, it's like your brain breaks. It's so bizarre. And so during the pandemic, when I wrote that article, it seemed like this incredible black hole almost of every issue of living in modern America, but also like the world, since we've exported our financial system and our hyper financialized system all over the world. And this struggle of being an entrepreneur, it seemed to take up every single part of every single issue. And the way the pandemic broke down along gender lines was really interesting. And MLM, has this element, especially in the US. So yeah, it felt like if we are in this moment where a lot of the systems that were put in place, 80 years ago, are breaking down. And so there's lots of people figuring out other ways to live, other ways to exploit each other. Like, that MLM feels like that's that's where it's all happening, at the same time. So as a journalist, it was like fascinating.
Did you come across it just as an observer during COVID, or did you have a personal experience or somebody tried to prospect you type of thing?
I definitely had girls in my high school who, as we got older on Facebook, would sell like Roden and Fields was a big one. You know, it changed, and many of them had married guys in the military. So that was sort of like probably my first exposure. And then, you know, just like a lot of Americans, it was something that I just understood being kind of in the water. Like I'd seen Death of a Salesman. My dad, when he went to college in the 70s, was a Fuller Brush scholar. He had a scholarship from Fuller Brush. So I was sort of aware of like old timey salesmen. And then had seen, you know, random sitcoms where pyramid schemes are the joke and all that. So it was something I was really loosely aware of. And then I listened to The Dream in 2019, which is a, you know, fantastic introduction to MLM, and was like really obsessed with it then. And then truly during the pandemic, just like had through Instagram rabbit holes, just kind of started observing people, which I guess is like creepy, but as a journalist, it's kind of your job. I just found some random, you know, high uplines in different companies and was seeing what they were doing. And then, of course, during the pandemic, they're doing like, send us your sponsor, yeah, you know, send us your stimulus check, use it on your business, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, whoa. And then we did a whole magazine issue on unemployment, more impacting women, what they were calling this she session, which didn't actually really pan out. Like it's kind of fake, but at the time, a lot of women were leaving work because they were doing childcare. And so we did a whole issue on that. And I just did, like I was saying, one of those really short articles on MLM. And to describe MLM, I was like, this is not good. Like it's a crappy description, because to do it in this much words, you have to be crappy. Like you're not doing it justice. And so it just started, it was something that I couldn't shake. And I was approached about doing another book involving like kind of girl bosses and the fall of the girl boss. And I was like, I don't think girl bosses have fallen. I think girl bosses have proliferated, women who think they're their own bosses. And that's where literally the title came from, the first conversation, Little Bosses Everywhere, before the book had even happened. So that's kind of the backstory.
Okay, interesting. I'll say for me, the moment where I sort of had like a almost my going crazy moment or my like epiphany moment
Mm-hmm.
came
Yeah.
probably a couple of years into me making videos about MLM,
Mm.
where I realized that it wasn't hyperbolic or exaggerative to say that, at least in some ways, Amway rules the world, and that so much of this is Amway. I wrote the note in my notes, says everything is Amway, to ask you this question. Seeing how Amway and the DeVos and Van Andel families have used not only Amway to enrich themselves beyond most people's wildest imaginations, but also to use their money in politics to further causes that they believe in, and ultimately
Mm-hmm.
American hegemony across the globe. What for you was the moment when you were like, oh, this rabbit hole goes way deeper than I thought, or when you realized truly how big MLM was?
That's a really good and fun question. This might not be the bigness you're talking about, but in terms of the depth, I will say that um, early on in my research, I was reading this book that Bob Fitzpatrick has also read. I think we've talked about it together. It's called Invisible Hands by this historian Kim Phillips Fine. I don't know if he's recommended it to you, but it tracks the backlash to the New Deal and the welfare state that was established in the United States after the Depression. And that became very important because obviously DeVos and Van Andel, the Amway founders, the backlash that they helped build in the 70s and 80s, what we would call the new right that leads to Ronald Reagan being elected. The argument of this book is that it's a project that started much earlier. It didn't start in the 70s or 80s. It started actually in the 30s after the New Deal passed all kinds of new legislation that basically reined in big business, right? So the New Deal in the United States passes Social Security, the payroll tax, unemployment benefits. It banned child labor. So this is after the Depression. Basically, politicians and on the right and the left the depression was so bad that they came together and said, okay, there are basics that we're gonna require American capital to provide basic quality of life for all Americans. So these are like universal policies. So this is stuff that is very normal if you're, today, but at the time it was hugely, it transformed the United States. Anyway, that's the quick and dirty version. But in this book, one of her main characters is this guy Leonard Reed, and he was a Chamber of Commerce figure. He's from California. He's like, again, a shitty salesman. He tries to sell real estate. He tries to have a grocery store. He fails. He fails. He comes to California and becomes an evangelist for small business. This is in the 20s and 30s, and then he's really radicalized in this period we're talking about, and becomes extremely against Social Security, the New Deal, this welfare state that Roosevelt has set up, and he starts a bunch of think tanks and other organizations that we can now see as part of places like the Heritage Foundation, American Enterprise Institute. So like these conservative policy factories. So anyway, long story short, at some point early on in my research, at the 10th anniversary of Neutralite, so this is after Neutralite has been around and they're millionaires and everyone's talking about how successful they are, and of course they're just defrauding people. This guy is the featured speaker at their 10th anniversary reception in Long Beach. This, think tank, his think tank was like in Boston or New York or something. I can't remember exactly where. But like the fact that already in the 50s, this guy had latched onto MLM as a propaganda factory for this message that he and his friends were trying to spread among the people, which is that like these government programs make us slaves and the government should be as small as possible, and also just that capitalism needs to be totally unfettered, that it needs to have less rules, which of course MLM has long been trying to do, because they don't want any rules, obviously, because then they would be regulated out of existence, right? So just his presence at this event to me was like, whoa, 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 whoa. These people are, it goes way deeper, this marriage between the politics you're talking about and MLM. That to me was like a aha moment of like, it's just such a deeper, they have such a deeper relationship than even we know. And that early on was quite exciting for me, I think.
Early on in the book, we meet somebody who I'm guessing this is a pseudonym, a fake name, Monique. And Monique is somebody
Yeah.
who you sort of chronicle in segments throughout the book, her journey through the company Mary Kay. And we sort of go through the history of Mary Kay and where it came from, and how its sort of legacy has endured. And I learned some things that I didn't know about in this book, some things that I hadn't learned from Robert's book Ponzinomics, about Mary Kay that I thought was interesting. But I sort of had the same thought that I don't want to spoil the book, but you quote Robert in the book.
You can spoil it.
Okay, they're all pyramid schemes. Okay, you quote you quote Robert in the book as saying, "Where else would it come from?" with reference to the Mary Kay plan. And I sort of had the same thought when I first read the first Monique segment. I thought, I wonder where this is going. And then, of course, you sort of talk in the book about why it's important to you. But for those who haven't yet read the book or who may want to read the book, tell me, why did you decide to have this through line about Mary Kay in the book?
Like I said earlier, Mary Kay, especially if you're a woman, Mary Kay is at this point so normalized culturally. It's like the collapse between the Avon lady and Mary Kay, and of course, Avon did not start as MLM. Avon was for a long time regular direct selling. It's a huge, like, I'm going to use the word propaganda again, but it's a huge part of the propaganda of MLM to make it seem old-timey and fuddy-duddy and sweet and silly. Like, once I was able to look at the history of MLM, it's so clear that in the 60s, when Mary Kay starts, and then there's lots of copycats of women's companies, they use them to make MLM seem more palatable, to take away from attention on the scammier male-dominated companies. Dare to Be Great, Cost Caught, Holiday Magic. Those are very masculine companies. The guys doing that are like the mafia. That's how they act. They wear these, like, it's all flash. Like William Penpatrick was very Trumpy with his gold bathroom. Like, so there's the Michigan Christian guys doing it at Amway, but Mary Kay is hugely important because it helps the DSA and other MLM lobbyists to say these are just women filling their sugar bowl. These are just housewives. It really helps hide MLM. And Mary Kay was very smart that she realized, this is her whole shtick, even though there's an amazing memoir by this woman, Jackie Brown, who's one of Mary Kay's first recruits, and you should read it. You would love it. And she exposes Mary Kay as like incredibly manipulative, like put these were Baptist Christians, they didn't drink, but at the first convention she spikes a punch because she's like, everybody needs to loosen up. She was very cunning, but she would like to say things like profit and loss stands for people in love, or like, I don't know about finance. Like, that was the whole thing, was like, how could she be running a pyramid scheme? She's just a sweet old lady. So
It was
Mary Kay is really important.
So
What?
I was just gonna say it's like the "I'm just a girl" TikTok trend, but like before TikTok.
100%. Yes, yes. And obviously they still do it, right? When MLMs, women who are big uplines get together and they act like it's like we're just hanging out with their sisters. Like, it's the same shit. But anyway, so narratively, Mary Kay is really important in telling the story because, of course, what happens in the 70s, the FTC starts cracking down and regulators are circling. And so women are a really important part of the story of taking the attention away from like the predatory pyramid scheme nature of it and selling that lie that they shut down pyramid schemes and what Mary Kay and Amway do is different. So that's one thing. And then and of course, part of that is the iconography of Mary Kay, like the pink Cadillac, the makeup. Like, Mary Kay's books are huge bestsellers. Like, so many people who have nothing to do with MLM have read her memoirs because they're this like self-help crap. And so she's like a really big figure. So that was one thing to me that was really important. And then why I stuck with Monique and her story is I really wanted to, it was important for me to understand just the granular mechanics of being in an MLM. Like, what does it actually look like? What are you doing with your money every month? What is the back? And she was still in Mary Kay technically at this point. So she let me into her back office, their like software. And so I could see what it actually looks like, what they're tracking. And it's so obvious that they're not tracking any real sales. And it's so she showed me how you can fake it in terms of your retail customers. So all of that, I wanted to show exactly what it looks like to be a participant. And for all those reasons I mentioned, Mary Kay was what I picked. And just sticking with her, she had so much evidence and she had a decade in this company. And so it just, she made sense to me as like a main character, to kind of understand while you're learning about the history, to also just understand what it's like every day to meet somebody in MLM. Like, this is what they're really doing, this buying.
That brings me to a good segue for another question that I was actually planning on bringing up later, but I'll ask it now since it fits
Okay.
here. You touch on something when you talk about her showing you the back office and you sort of seeing tangibly, like, what do you do? How does it work? I really appreciated on page 3 of the book, and I don't know if this will be page 3 for you at home. The publisher sent me an advanced
I
reader
think
copy of
not.
this, so it might be different for you. But assuming that this part hasn't changed, then I want to read a little a blurb here. In multi-level marketing, the word sales doesn't mean what it typically means. Instead, it represents an impressive feat of doublespeak. The 40 plus billion in sales with which the industry purports to make up its value are in reality purchases made by its own sellers. Now, I'm sure that, like any normal person, when you read this, you were like, huh, that's pretty backwards. And I mean, as you put one toe into the waters of multi-level marketing, and then you put in your whole foot, and then you dive all the way in, you realize that almost every single term in their vernacular is a instance of doublespeak or just simply a lie. So what was this sort of was this like a snowball effect for you, where you thought it was just the one word that was allowing them to have this sort of like regulatory loophole and they were tricky with it, and then you started to realize more and more and more? Like, what was, I guess I'm trying to ask a good question, what was like your feeling or your reaction to seeing how
Yeah.
they've really had to create their own dictionary of language?
I mean, and of course, like, that's, Bob has already, if you've read Ponzionomics, like you've been exposed to that idea already, because Bob is so inspired by Orwell, and that's where we get that idea and the concept of doublethink is from 1984 and from Big Brother. And so I was prepared for that, but I think, yeah, once you once you understand that these people are going to the steps of the Capitol and celebrating their sales that are literally the opposite of sales, they are purchases. I did start to go insane. Like, I'm at dinner with my boyfriend and I'm screaming at him like, does this make sense to you? And he's just like, we're at dinner, can you can you calm down?
I've been
I
there.
was like telling everybody, like, how can this be? And so that was one thing. And yeah, I mean, you do learn, like in Mary Kay, the fact that they call purchases production. That's another one. That's amazing. You're producing nothing. It's the opposite of production. It's consuming. It's amazing that they call it production. Like, that's an insane word. And of course, when you're thinking about, like, is an MLM contractor a worker? Are they doing work? Like, production makes it seem like they're producing something of value, when of course it is the opposite. So that, to me, the fact that they called it production, I was like, I was sort of blown away by that is Orwellian. It feels like a novel. It feels like a dystopian novel, because it's like, how can this be? And then of course later in my research, when I put it to the DSA, I found this document that was an advisory document publicly available on the DSA's website, sort of advising DSA member companies on how to estimate their retail sales. And that's where I got that formula that the DSA used at that point, which is essentially multiplying their purchases by their participants by 0.75. That's their formula. That's just how they do it.
And it's just
Calculate
made
retail
up.
sales. It's just totally made up. And when they did not respond when we asked them about it, but to have a whole industry, of course, so much of American industry and just the financial world at large is speculation. And a company, giant tech companies speculate on their value. Like right now, many AI companies, right, for example, are speculating on value that doesn't necessarily exist. So that's scammy in its own way. But the idea that you literally don't know, and you never know what the actual retail value of your entire industry is, and every year you get to make it up, that's nuts. That's crazy. And you have lobbyists that are in the offices of the halls of Congress that you're giving money to, all the way to Donald Trump. Like, it's wild. It's wild.
We're getting too deep
it's so
now.
much scammier. Well, I just mean,
Yeah.
it's so much scammier than anything else. It's like, okay, it's scammy that, like, giant banks that abuse their customers and that get taken to court, like, give a ton of money to politicians. Like, that's the classic American boodle that sucks. This is like allowing the shystiest, most shadiest, like, off the street, doorbell ringing scammer into the halls of power, and that's obviously what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you don't want to quantify your retail sales, just change the definition of the word retail and call it something new.
Which
And
of course is what Mittinger and Cassawary did so long ago, and they did it so early in America's consumer boom in the 50s, that they, like, camouflage themselves. If you think about that era of the United States, it was like the Mad Men era, where we were just overwhelmed with products, and so they were very savvy to do that during this era where everybody was just talking about growth and constant products and consumption, and nobody thought to say, hey, are people actually buying these vitamins? Nobody. They really hid among a booming consumer economy.
yeah, that leads to another element that I guess is appropriate to talk about here, which is not only does the language get camouflaged and, get the doublespeak treatment, this carries over as well to the way that these companies try to control the narrative around them. So without revealing too much information, I can tell you generally that in lawsuits from MLM companies where they claim, how do I say this delicately? It's very interesting to stand in a courtroom and listen to a high-paid lawyer for a powerful criminal organization say, this person said X, Y, and Z lies about us to try to make money. Well, that's exactly what you're doing. It's the classic, like, accuse the other person of what you are doing to try to sort of put them on the back foot and beat them to it. It applies not just to their language, it applies to their legal tactics, and I guess that's part of the propaganda as well. It also applies to the people they go for. I
Mm.
describe this as sort of like MLM is like a shape-shifting cult. It's not a religious cult. It's not a political cult. It doesn't matter if you're black or white ethnically. It doesn't matter if you're red or blue politically. They are going for one color, and that is the green that's in your pocket. And it doesn't matter what you
Right.
subscribe
It's a
to.
business cult. It's a business cult. Yeah.
It's a cult that isn't really about business, but it misappropriates, or I guess expropriates would be the word, the language of business. And this also, I don't know if you noticed this or had this thought ever, but I've thought about this many times about how they also do this with the products themselves. So in the book, you talk about how, like, most of their products are just like white labeled junk, lotions and
Hmm.
potions is as it goes. But the justifications for all of these products is so amazing, because in every MLM I've ever looked at deeply, they all have some fancy justification for why it's essential and
Of
everlasting,
course.
like the hair care MLMs. They'll say, well, your hair never stops growing, so people are always going to need this. Trying to sort of assert some sort of like real world demand when there
Yeah.
isn't
Yeah.
none.
Yeah.
Or the insurance people,
Uh-huh.
well, everyone's going to die. That's a guarantee, so you need life insurance. Or,
Yeah.
the vitamins. Oh, you always, you need to be healthy, or you have nothing, so you need vitamins. I just find it's so ubiquitous that it's like, you know, to stand in a courtroom and try to explain to a judge that, actually, judge, what they're referring to as their sales isn't even actually
Mm.
sales. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like you have to do so much. I don't know. It makes you
Undoing.
feel, yeah, it makes you feel crazy sometimes when I speak about it, because I've had those moments like you, where, like, you're sitting at dinner and you're like, and another thing. So I
Yeah.
don't
I
know. It's not
mean,
really a question, but
I want to. I have to send this to you. Actually, there's really early on something I found, because of course we all know how Amway came from Nutrilite, and before that NutriBio, which is probably the United States and Canada's first true pyramid scheme, like where it spread across the country really fast, and it was in all kinds of newspaper articles. That was NutriBio, in the late 50s. But before that, I found in my archival research a company called Numana that took off from Nutrilite in 1953, so way earlier, and found it because Nutrilite sued Numana for taking their downline. It was just like a bunch of Wisconsin Nutrilite distributors, and they just copied the product, or excuse me, the plan with a new product. And in the lawsuit, there's court transcripts, and the judge trying to understand the business model is so funny. He's like, he literally can't understand. He's like, where are the sales? What is proprietary here? What's being sold? And they explain, they say it's basically refunds. They're very upfront about it. That these are people making purchases and they're getting refunds. That this has nothing to do with sales. And if you look at the early MLM plan materials, they say profits pyramid, they say rebate, they say refund. It has nothing to do with sales, and they did not hide it. Early Amway materials literally had a guy kicking back in a rocking chair on the top of a pyramid. They were very upfront about it before pyramid became a bad word. So like the propaganda of it's now just so deep. But even then, this judge in 1953 is going like, what? Like, what is this? How are you guys getting paid? Like, it was already so visible. And I'll send you the old document, because the listening to the judge like trying to get it is exactly the feeling you're describing. And then at the end, of course, as so many things, he's just like gavel gavel whatever. Like, what's he gonna do? So
yeah, he
so
doesn't
people
care.
just moved on. And the fact that Judge Timoney in the Amway case, not to skip too far ahead, but the fact that like he's persuaded by the fact that Amway on the stand puts a Harvard Business School professor who says, I'm so impressed with Amway's brand loyalty, that their customers are so loyal. And it's like, well, yeah, because they're getting paid based on how much they're buying. Like, it would be like if you go buy a tub of Tide because Tide has told you that you can make an income if you buy enough Tide. Like, the buy-in here is remarkable.
And that
And
was
yeah, I mean,
conveniently left out, of course, the fact
so
that they
long.
haven't a financial incentive to.
Of course.
So, I mean, that's the same thing that really troubled me with Niora, that the judge, I don't know if you're familiar with that
Yeah.
case, but yeah, the judge said, like, well, we can't really say that these people are victims because they got products they valued. Well, it's like, does the judge understand that these people had a financial incentive? We can't really trust, even if we were able to march every single distributor of an MLM. I'm not going to pontificate about that specific case, but any MLM. If you brought all of their distributors into a courtroom to swear on the Bible and ask them, "Do you really love the product?" Of course, they would all say yes. They have to buy the
Oh,
product every month to.
they bleed out for the product. Yeah, yeah. I mean, speaking of Niora, I won't name her, but the DSEF, the Direct Selling Education Foundation economist, who's a professor at a major American higher education institution, who they often trot out to do their witness testimony, MLMs, when they're being sued. Speaking of doublespeak, she has this like incredible paper where she refers to MLMs as like she has her own concept for them, and it's called a voluntary economic arrangement. Like, so we've gone past side hustle, we've gone past how Joseph Mariano has said direct selling is an activity, it's not a job. And now it's a voluntary economic arrangement. And the whole paper is about the concept of harm. She's like redefining consumer harm in this industry. And basically the answer at the end of the paper is like, because it's all about your individual ability to do it, there really is no such thing as harm. Like, most people are not harmed. Even if you are losing money, you're like getting something out of it emotionally. Anyway, the whole paper is basically to redefine a concept that seems as straightforward as harm. So this constant undoing of what what you think making you, even if you're just a participant and you're being told to think differently, like Monique in the book, she's told, don't look at your bank account, don't look at gross and net, these like financial concepts, don't look at that, look at the horizon. Like, you think you're losing money, you think you're spending, but actually you're investing. It's all like redefining, very a cult tactic, like breaking down what you think and then rebuilding something else, so that you're looking at your bank account, and instead of saying like, wow, I'm really losing to this money to this fucking job, you're like, no, I'm investing. Like, that's
Yes, yes. Or they'll cope by saying, like, oh well, I learned a lot about self help, and I learned a lot about myself, and I had a great community, and I
absolutely,
made great friends. But that actually,
I'm
I didn't.
taking care of myself.
Yeah, I didn't know about that redefining of a voluntary economic activity. That reminds me of a great
Hmm.
creator named Always Marco has a clip where he talks about a spectrum of like economic activities and their willingness to participate in them, and like how it's a spectrum. So like on one end of the spectrum of full transparency, you have someone who willingly does work for money. That would be called a job. Then you have someone who
Hmm.
willingly does work for no money. We would call that volunteering. Then we have someone who unwillingly does work for no money. We would call that like slavery or human labor
Indentured
trafficking.
servitude. Yeah.
Right. So what would
Uh-huh.
we call it
Uh-huh.
then when somebody is willingly losing money while being deceived into thinking that they will make money, never receiving any money, and continually being deceived into paying again and again to lose money? It's like below indentured servitude. And that's what MLM distributors
Well,
are
right. And
are.
historically, we've called it fraud. And that's what Costco and Dare to Be Great and Bestline and the MLMs that were shut down in the 70s, they're fraud because they were very obviously perpetrated through lies. And that's what the FTC, that's its mandate technically, is deception and unfair practices. And so this has been decided. It was decided. It's just that then this carve out, the Amway rules, enable this loophole. And so that, yeah, I mean, what you're saying is absolutely true. Like, it's not even a scammy job like, the DOJ has gone after. For example, you could say Uber, right? And these economists reference things like Uber. They love the gig economy because, you know, it's changed over the years. Uber, Amazon, people who use contract labor, like, what are they allowed to say? What are they allowed to keep about how the job really works? and they've been dinged for deceiving independent contractors who think that they're going to have more freedom. Like the Uber algorithm, you know, if it doesn't actually let you choose like what car you're going to take next, for example, what customer, that's the stuff that in the past the DOJ has said that's unfair. These are or the Department of Labor, right? So that is, you're exactly right. That is different from it's a degree removed, but like straight up lies and fraud. Historically, that is how MLMs have recruited. We don't even have to. Amway was sued, in 2010, and settled for a huge amount of money. Like this is not even old. We don't even have to go back that far. Herbalife, $200 million. This is not, we're not saying anything secret. This is obvious.
Yeah, another thing too, I mean, not to get too philosophical or like think too hard about it, but I don't even know if fraud is the right word, because in an instance where someone defrauds another person, usually in every like classic example you can think of, like a Ponzi scheme, the person doing it knows they're doing it. And they at least would probably have the good sense to not like look someone in the face. Like I've said this before, like if I was going to steal money out of your purse, I would probably want to make sure I do it and then I never have to be in a situation where I have to look you in the face.
Right.
But what do you call it when someone doesn't even realize they're committing fraud and they're perpetrating it upon their own friends and family? It has to be something worse than that. And to this day, I think the only unique thing I can point to is, I mean, it goes back to it being a cult. No one who's in a cult thinks they're in a cult.
And that's so you're right, really unique about MLM. And that is another reason tracking Monique, but some other individuals in the book was really important to me, because I wanted to show how something I learned is how MLM makes you start lying right away. Once you sign up with the pitch, just like you're saying, the pitch that you're going to sell products and it's going to be easy and you're going to make money, you immediately realize that's not true, right? Like as soon as you start trying to hawk, once you go through your A list and your B list, your friends and family and like your close friends who buy a few products from you, you really quickly learn that soliciting people is never going to work and you have to recruit. And so what do? You're lying within weeks about how well you're doing. And you're right. That person isn't necessarily saying, oh, I'm going to swindle this motherfucker or I'm going to steal from her, right? Like that's not what that person is saying internally. That person is saying, hearing what they've heard from their uplines, which is just keep going. It's going to happen. You got to sell, right? They don't think that they're like Monique doesn't necessarily go into an interaction thinking I'm going to lie to this person, but that is what she's doing, because she's having to say I'm doing great when she's not. And
Right.
that starts right away. So it trains you. I mean, in what other world are you even allowed to sell a product before you even get it? Which of course is MLM, right? You can sign up to be a distributor for a company before you even get the product. You're talking about how great the product is. That's a lie. But like you're not necessarily internally, you're right, going into it thinking like, ooh, I'm a hustler, I'm a liar. Of course, their MLM history has many liars who were doing straight up fraud, starting from Carl Renberg saying he's a doctor, right? Like that's just a lie. But yeah, I think you're right that a lot of it's so insidious what it does to you psychologically, that a cult is much more of an apt comparison.
Yeah, because I mean, not only do they not think they're lying, they think they're helping. It's the opposite. I always say, like with MLM, you find the opposite of what is claimed is true. The opposite. So yeah, not only do they think they're not lying, they think they're helping. And I would actually argue, I mean, we could nitpick about this, but I would actually argue that the lying happens not weeks or early into it. It happens immediately when you hear the pitch. The pitch itself is a lie. The plan is a lie. The idea that, in every initial opportunity meeting I've ever attended of any MLM, the speaker makes sure to include a bit about how you might have heard from friends or family before that this doesn't work, or they tried this and it doesn't work. Well, I have a friend who signed up for a gym membership and he's still fat. Does that mean the gym doesn't work? So they use like false equivalence as well. So that's the lie you tell yourself initially from day zero, is that if it doesn't work, it must be my fault, which is another, which is, the ultimate.
You mean pushing past your red flags and pushing past your, for sure.
And it's, when you establish that in somebody's mind right away, that if you fail in this, it must be your fault. And look at me, I have the Rolex in the car, so it must work. You must have just not tried. That is what actually makes it makes me so angry about seeing these scammers prance across the stage at the highest level, the ones who know what they're doing, the CEOs, the corporate people,
Yeah.
the ones who have been in for years, because it takes the thing I said before about if I was to, if I was to say to you, Bridget, if I was to take $100 out of your bag or whatever, I would want to not look you in the face and have to admit that. In MLM, it's so the opposite of having to hide your shame. It's actually the opposite. It
Yes.
emboldens you for
Yes.
me to stare in your face and say, guess you didn't work hard enough after I just robbed you. It's truly evil is the only word I can use to describe it.
Maybe I'll put my tinfoil hat on here, and say that, one thing it is deranged, just delusional. It's crazy. And that what you're describing, this idea that what you just said about it's upfront, that the what you would normally think you would hide because you're harming somebody, you're doing upfront. That is very resonant of a dynamic I just, that became clear to me when I was looking at MLM, how it justified itself early on. And Bob goes into this in his book too, what early on Mittinger and Castleberry said out loud, which is they said if this worked, it would go on forever, right? And that is, of course, a Ponzi scheme. That is that math problem. What Bob and Bob's cult presentation that you watched on your channel and that I watched. Of course, he's so good explaining the math, which I find mentally really hard. I'm not a math person, and that's not how I think. And the way he describes the exponential math is so helpful. But that's the math problem, right? It's like nothing goes on forever. There's no infinite customers. There's no infinite sales. Even if you spread, we would all be doing it, right? It's so obviously fraudulent. But what they are able to say out loud, what MLM has always said out loud is it's possible, baby. You can do it. This is endless. Opportunities are endless. You can make endless profits. That's crazy. That's not that's delusion. It's derangement. It's like that is beyond reason. It's nonsensical. Like there's so many different ways to say it's irrational, right? But like that, it really is this irrational thing. And that core, to me, one of the reasons the United States does not clamp down on that core irrational thought is because it's a positive story about the American economy. It's a positive story about consumers, about how many our earning potential, that the United States will always have more people buying, more people coming here, more people who are able to buy in, and that you Marco will be able to build. Don't look up at the upline who has a yacht and you're living in your mom's basement and think, hey, this is unfair. Think, oh, there's more than enough time for me to have my own yacht one day, right? Like we're always constantly being fed this idea that there's more time, the economy's going to grow, we all have a chance, and that's what makes it fair. That it's fair because, oh, they're not hoarding the wealth at the top. Like we all have the ability to build that wealth. Meanwhile, there's more and more evidence that it's not trickling down in the way we've been told, right? So to me, that's a core, that element of like delusion about growth is really, really important. And that's a big resonance of why, parts of the legitimate economy, why people don't want to confront the fact that so much of this demand and this growth is possibly manufactured and a lie, and not coming in the way that we've been promised that it'll come.
Yeah, I mean, for there to be unlimited opportunity, there would have to be unlimited money. And this is super tinfoil hatty, but not really. But it's definitely a video for another topic.
Put it
but
on, put it on.
There kind of is infinite money.
Sure, there can be, but are there infinite resources? Is the planet infinitely resourced? I don't think so.
I'm sort of just making like an aside commentary about how like what is money? Like they just
Yes,
it
yes,
comes
yes,
from
yes.
nothing.
And that goes all the way back to Napoleon Hill. Yeah. And the idea that, money comes from the universe and money is an energy and that we can draw and manifest, and like these women who do this like EFT tapping on your forehead, that you can draw money, all of that. The mysticism of money is such a big part of MLM, that we can attract money, that we can like bring money to us, almost like it's water, right? Like that's obviously a big part of MLM.
Of course.
Even if you're not doing anything, that you're going to get money is, that's the American dream. Get rich quick, do nothing, and money comes,
Another absurdity that I'm really glad you touch on in the book, and people would know this if they've read Ponzinomics as well, which I hope they have. I think Ponzinomics is a great like thing to read before you read this. So, I'm promoting both here.
It's so good. It's
Um,
so good, and Bob's such a good writer, and it's such a you can feel his he's a very expressive writer.
you and him both talk about how the only way to truly be the boss in MLM is to spin off, and specifically spin off of Amway or spin off of a spin off of Amway. And it reminds me, there's the saying, the only get rich quick scheme is selling a get rich quick scheme. The only way to get rich out of MLM is to start an MLM. And so you can actually trace like pick any MLM, find their top distributor or their founder. You will be able to trace back their connection to Amway. Either they were in a company that was started by someone who spun off of Amway. So it's sort of like, I've described this. I have a video on my channel where I describe the difference between legitimate MLMs and illegal pyramid schemes. And I talk about how the MLM apparatus, I don't like to say industry because it's not an industry. The MLM apparatus itself is a pyramid scheme of pyramid schemes.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and I did this on Julie's channel, but I'll grab my little map here. And Dave Vaughn,
Shout out
I
Dave.
shouted him out too on her channel. I love Dave. Dave has built one of these too, and he and I compared notes and helped each other in building. I mean, speaking of the tinfoil hat, or like the Charlie Day from what's it called? Always Sunny meme. Sorry, I'm looking for my map here. So here's my cuckoo craziness, and this only goes to 1970. So this is even pre-Herbalife. But yeah, I mean, we get Est from here. I don't know if you know much about Est, but Est is huge, like culturally. Est is a it's for Earhart Seminars training. It was a huge life self-help movement in the 70s. Werner Erhard was a holiday magic distributor, car salesman who left his entire family, moved across to California, and so we get him. We get Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins, was a protege of Jim Rohn, one of the NutraBio, very successful NutraBio trainer, because he was an evangelical preacher, banned from doing chain selling in California starting in like the early 60s. And of course, he becomes Herbalife's lead business philosopher and takes Tony Robbins. I found in a memoir of one of Keith Raniere's girlfriends from NXIVM, Keith Raniere, that not only was Keith in Amway, but when he was starting his other MLM's consumer byline, and then he wanted to start a supplements one, he saw Tony Robbins opening his franchises, which were also sued as pyramid schemes, and said, "Oh, I'll do that," and just started NXIVM, his multi-level marketing structured self-help company, which of course was shut down as a cult that branded women with hot irons. But anyway, I mean, we could go. Yes, they're all connected. And that was honestly one of the reasons why it was so important to me to get Mary Kay in there, because she was the one company I could not connect to the web.
Don't spoil that part. Don't spoil that part. That's a good part.
Well, okay, I won't say, but I'm just saying that's why to me it was really important, because that kept being the one thing where I was like, well, if she came up with this on her own, maybe it, I didn't buy in, but it was more evidence for their narrative, which is that MLM is a natural evolution of direct selling. Like MLM just makes sense once you have door-to-door selling, which of course it's not. But that's why when I found that connection, it was really important to me, and I won't spoil it.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, you'll have to read the book. Little Bosses Everywhere, out May 6th. I also think it's funny you mentioned this in the book. This is sort of like a random thing, but it made me chuckle because I've seen this before. So MLM companies will draw what they call their compensation plan, or the plan, and they have different ways of describing it and drawing it. In the book, you talk about drawing circles and how like the Amway early distributors or early founders, whatever, would draw circles, right? It's like there's you, and then there's 5 people below you.
That was it, drawing circles.
And tell us the bit about how somebody in Amway described it not as a pyramid, where you have one person here and then below and then more below and then more below, but actually as a flower shape where it's sort of like concentric circles, like branching out from the main
Yeah.
circle, and
Well,
sort of you're looking down at it from a bird's eye instead of sideways at it.
unfortunately, that wasn't even someone in Amway. That was a journalist who wrote one of the only books about Amway. It's called Amway Forever. I think her name is Catherine Jones. Um, there, she clearly had some cooperation from Amway, which just like knowing a little bit how the sausage is made in terms of writing a book, like I guess if they gave her access, she was more inclined to like regurgitate that because clearly that's what they said is they were it wasn't she literally says in the book it wasn't a pyramid, it was a flower shape, which is
Yes.
obviously what Amway has told her, so she's just parroting what they've told her uncritically, which is really unfortunate and disappointing, but that's where that was from I
Yeah.
think that book came out in 2015 or maybe earlier 2013, something like that. But yeah, that's where I got that, and of course that's so funny to think of it as looking down at a bird's eye. Like that is, I guess, what a pyramid. It does radiate out like a flower. Like I mean, but that stuff is everywhere. That stuff is the uncritical, just like regurgitation of the MLM talking points are everywhere. So that type of thing is
The
par for the
reason.
course. But yes, go ahead.
So no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say the yeah, I mean the euphemisms for MLM are really funny.
Yeah, the reason I bring that up is because MLM has gone so hard to try to like make this as confusing as possible to understand. So they've come up with all these fancy names. Like there's the forced matrix, there's the binary plan, there's the unilevel plan, there's the two up plan. And some
Oh
will
my
say like,
god.
okay, it goes two down and two wide. Or some will say it goes only one level down, but it can go 10 across. Well, it you realize that if you actually draw this on paper, it doesn't matter how you arrange it. It still ends up being an endless chain where it's an extreme money transfer, where you have the vast majority of people on the bottom layer at all times, regardless of you draw if you draw it as 5 by 5 or 10 by 10 or 1 by 8 or 8 by 1. It makes no difference. So all of this is
No.
just such I couldn't even christen it clever. It's not even clever. It's just like it's just so fucking stupid.
It's all dressed up in jargon, business jargon. And again, not to repeat myself, but that's what Mittinger and Castleberry early on, right? They had both been in sales, they knew the jargon, and really early on they realized they could smuggle in this Ponzi structure inside sales, and sales has so many euphemisms. A close, what is a close? It's convincing someone to do something they don't necessarily want to do, right? Even the sales language is full of euphemisms, because if you talked about it really, truthfully, you would be talking about coercing someone, you would be talking about being a street magician, doing your show, like that's really what you would say. So that's like in the DNA of MLM, is the jargon and the magic words.
So I mentioned to you off the record, I'll bring it up again now. I'm working on this piece about Amway and its impact in Asia. You mentioned
Mm,
the DeVos and Van Andel duo of the of G2 second generation,
me too,
um,
yeah. Hmm.
and Carl Renborg's son going to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia for an Amway event a few years ago. I was actually in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia at Amway's headquarters doing a tour of it not even a year ago as
Wow,
part of this
jealous.
as part of this investigation. It's really remarkable how it's quite literally, in my opinion, a propaganda museum. It tells their version
100%.
of the story. It's almost exactly like what you described with the Mary Kay Museum that you visit in the book in the summer of 2023. And I had two friends with me. I was a bit worried, like maybe somebody's going to recognize me. What are the odds? Maybe they're going to try to kick me out. So I had friends there to sort of help me play the part of just like a lost tourist who had just like sort of stumbled in.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
I had like my phone on like a selfie stick to like film stuff, and it was for the purpose of the video, but I had them
Very
there
good.
sort of as distractions, like we're just buddies traveling. Anyways,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
my one friend, he went up to like they have the section that was like a little Amway cafe, and they sell the excess energy drink and whatever, and he wanted to buy a shake. He was like curious, he wanted to buy a shake. um the difficulty in him even buying a drink at what looked to be like a store. There was a cash register, there was a cashier there. They had to go like find somebody who was a registered Amway
Right,
distributor,
right.
and like they
Uh-huh.
bought it and then he reimbursed them. The reason I'm bringing this up is to talk about, just like we were talking about with the shape, the flower shape, it is the disguise. There's so many layers to the disguise. And in the book, you talk about yourself going to an Herbalife nutrition club. Sorry, that's it. I knew it.
Clubs,
Nutrition
clubs.
club. And you talk in the book about how it's like a theater set. And this is exactly, I haven't used the term theater set. I've used the term Fisher Price play set when I talk about the insurance MLMs and how they have these like
Yeah.
offices where it's like,
There's one right down my street
yes, it's like
in
there's a
Brooklyn.
computer, there's a desk, there's all the like signage that you would associate. You know the Who's That Pokemon meme?
No, but go
Okay,
ahead.
it's like the silhouette of a Pokemon where you can very clearly tell that it's like Charmander or something based on the shape,
Okay,
like it's
okay.
for
Yeah, yeah,
kids.
yeah.
But then when it like reveals it and it like fades from being opaque to showing it, it's like something completely different. That's sort of like
Uh-huh.
what these nutrition clubs and offices are to me. It's like this is a Who's That Pokemon, and you think, oh, it's a business, oh, it's a smoothie shop, oh, it's a insurance office, and then it actually ends up being not that at all. Why am I bringing
Yeah.
this up? Because I wanted to ask you about when you went to the store in the book, you talk about paying
Uh-huh.
to buy a shake. Anyways, my question really here in setting all of this up, the Kuala Lumpur Amway thing, the you buying the Herbalife shake,
Yep.
people have always recommended this to me in my comments. They've been like, I have an idea for a video. Why don't you join an MLM and see how far you can go, just like for the experiment of it? Well, one, we don't need to do that to understand that the math trick. And two, I've thus far in the 6 years I've been doing this have successfully never given a single penny to any MLM company. I've done all of the infiltrations and stuff that I've done completely covertly and free of charge. So did you have any feeling about paying for the shake because you know
Mm.
that every penny does indirectly or directly support this like system of servitude and evil?
Definitely. It was like a decision I had to make about like whether it was worth it to me to get the experience and to see if she was following the rules, and I just made that calculation that the $9 I gave her was worth it. But for sure, and I think that MLMs rely on that people don't want to, that it is so insular and people aren't going to, don't ethically want to participate. And going to the Mary Kay convention, I did consider signing up to get in. But the not only paying Mary Kay would have been, like you're saying, ethically questionable. You sign a really intense non-disparagement clause. And a bunch of lawyers looked at the materials for me and they said I would not do this as a journalist, and so I had to get in another way. But yeah, I mean, definitely there, that was just a calculation I had to make, and I really wanted to see how the shops worked, like in my neighborhood. You go in New York, there are lots of them, and you walk around in Herbalife, and you have no idea, or you have no idea that they're in Herbalife. So I really wanted to go, so I just decided to go.
Yeah, that's fair, and I don't judge you for that. The only reason I bring it up is because people have asked me many times, like, well, what if I'm just trying to like support my friend? Well, what I always try to explain to people is that like there's no nice way to say it, but what you think you're doing, which is supporting your friend, is like continuing to guarantee their indentured servitude. So you're actually doing the generous thing by not supporting their MLM involvement. The sooner they lose in MLM, or the sooner they realize that it's a losing proposition, the sooner they get out and do something good with their lives. So it's always like this thing of like, to them, they see it as you not supporting them. But to me, I see it as like, you'll thank me one day type of thing. So that's all. That's the only reason I brought it up. But
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And I it was yeah, I mean, some of the shops are, yeah, even bigger in terms of like, they operate like totally. And there have been some good articles, and like places like Eater, like some food websites have covered Herbalife shops because the shakes and the teas like went kind of viral during the pandemic. These like crazy colored like gross teas. Anyway, so there's been some good investigative journalism, and I would be interested to know what those journalists did too. That's an interesting thought.
Or the movie Betting on Zero is a great one if y'all are interested in. You had mentioned Amway settlements. You'd mentioned there being one in 2010. You also talk in the book about there being ones there was one really big one in Canada in the 80s, which in the book it says that this was at the time, somebody had called this the biggest. I'm trying to find the exact.
It's like the largest fraud case, largest tax fraud case in Canadian history.
That's right. There was another one, 1984. The plaintiff Cairns against Amway, $120 million lawsuit that was settled for an undisclosed amount. There was the Canada one I find really interesting. 1981. Here I circled it. The Canadian government filed a criminal case against Van Andel de Vos and two Amway vice presidents, alleging that they had defrauded the country out of more than $28 million. What I find so interesting about this case, and I've read about it before, but I really thought about it extra hard after reading it again in your book.
Mm-hmm.
They were charged with deliberately misrepresenting the value of Amway products shipped into Canada for 15 years, faked hundreds of invoices to avoid customs duties, blah, 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 blah. The company pled guilty to this. The company pled guilty to defrauding the government and agreed to pay a fine of $20 million, which in 1981 dollars, I mean,
a lot of money.
A lot of money.
It was historic in Canada.
I'm bringing this up because I want to know what you think of this. The fact that companies can do wrong, admit to doing wrong, and then still just buy their way out of it with a fine that is probably inconsequential compared to the amount they've been making through this wrongdoing.
Capitalism, baby. That's what, and that's what Jason Jones, who says to me at the end of the book, like when I said to him, is the FTC just going after bigger fish in terms of financial crime, right? And he says, what fish? The Great Recession, we bailed out those banks, and they were the people, not everyone in them, but multiple parties in those banks knew what they were doing, were buying and selling these like incredibly toxic products, that's just, unfortunately, that is, we don't treat financial crime like real crime, and we don't keep companies bad actors. I mean, you just the newest case that was just filed, those are, talk about bad actors with histories. I just said Jim Rohn, who was banned from in the 60s. He's doing it in the 80s. I mean, we never put the cat back in the bag. It never happens. And I don't know how, if other countries, like, I think of it similarly with like countries where there's harder, and this is controversial, but free speech, for example, in countries where if you actually lie about something, like in COVID in Australia, there were some people that lied about different products that could treat COVID, right? And they were actually fined. Like in Australia, if you do something like that, you can be fined. In the United States, it's really hard to prove that somebody has, it's either libel or defamation and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I'm just saying, I don't know what it would take to actually get these people to stop besides putting them in jail, because fining doesn't seem to work. It never has worked, as you're saying.
What you're referring to is the announcement by the FTC just a few days ago that they are suing the company I Am Academy, well, now called Iovia, formerly known as I Am Academy. I'll be careful here, but I made some videos about that company in 2021. I also did quite a thorough Instagram campaign where I was exposing more of the practices, talking about companies, settlements, the way the FTC goes about these cases. The FTC sued this company for deceptive claims and said that they're a multi-level marketing company, and there's a quote in that press release that says, "The breadth of this scam is remarkable." Well, what's the scam?
Mm-hmm.
This brings me to the final chapter of your book, and I don't want to spoil this, but I am connected to the characters you mentioned at the end of this book in real life and in this specific dispute. So you mentioned the MLM conference, which started in 2021. I spoke on it in 2023 and 2024. And, Doug Brooks, who I think the only like high quality sit down interview that Doug Brooks has ever done is the one he did with me on my channel. Robert, I think my interview with him is the like second most viewed Robert Fitzpatrick interview behind like CoffeeZilla. Bill Keep was in my most viewed video ever about Primerica, which had, you know, I can't say too much about that. And how do I say this in a way that's not going to get me angry phone calls or texts?
Or me.
Or you.
Protect me.
So, okay, let me just say, so all three of those guys are very dear to me. I view them all as allies. I look up to them. You know, the work that I do, I'm standing on their shoulders in many ways. And they've been personally helpful to me in situations that I'm not at liberty to talk about as well. There are sort of two schools of thought presently when it comes to how the FTC can or should approach MLM. Robert has been very vocal about the fact that he wants the FTC to just outlaw MLM because any sort of discussions about rulemaking or regulation sort of just serve to support the lie that MLM is a real business. If you're regulating it, it means it must be regulatable. But he's said before in many different comparisons, like, how do you regulate, you know, can you regulate fraud? Can you regulate, you know?
And Bruce Craig said it before him too. So Bruce,
Okay.
like he's
Yep.
for
Shout
sure.
out Bruce Craig. Rest in peace.
Well, and just to say that it's not like Bob, you know, being crazy. Like that's a school of thought that, you know, Bob and Bruce shared before Bruce passed.
On the other end of the spectrum, there's Bill. When I say Bill, I'm talking about William Keep. I know he's served as like expert witness in FTC cases. I know he's interested in working with the government. I know Doug also is. My thing is just like, let's look at the history of what has happened, what that's led to. Even if good strides are made, what happens if a new president comes in and just sort of like guts regulation and says, no, we're not doing that anymore? It's like, I don't know. My personal feeling is that we're in a time now which none of these gentlemen had the benefit of the internet and like social media when they've been doing this for decades. We now have, you know, individual people with YouTube channels who can actually like organize and rally people to report companies. And as we talked about a minute ago, like FTC just the other day announced they're suing IM Academy. Like, I think that this is sort of the way that we're going to like bleed MLM out of existence, not regulate it out of existence, but either like PR it out of existence by showing what it really is so that people don't join them, or like create so much public outcry that the government is forced to do something in spite of the lobbying dollars that come their way. I know I'm rambling, but I want to know where you stand on this. Like, what do you think about this? I'm not trying to put you in an uncomfortable spot.
Yeah, I think it's a question of strategy, right? And you know, I used to write about politics, and this is such a question in political organizing, right? It's like, do you attack from the outside and do you try to burn the whole system down, or do you work incrementally? And I won't reveal too much about my personal politics, but like there's a reason I say in the book, like, you know, Robert wants to burn it all down, and I get why. You know, like I think I come from a systemic a place where the systemic analysis of MLM is really important to me, and so I do think going piece by piece is not working and hasn't worked. I understand the other side of working within what we have and trying to chip away. Like that makes sense strategically too, and I think serves a purpose. So honestly, the two flanks, how everybody works, how you work, how social media works, on top of the regulation that can be done. Yeah, I think that all of that together is really important. I do think, you know, Andrew Ferguson, who's now the FTC commissioner, who is a sort of unique individual. He's like Trump has installed FTC folks who do support antitrust regulation on some level, meaning like breaking up big tech, like they still sued Google, right? These aren't people who are just like capitulating to like big companies or capitalism or whatever. But you know, the DSA put out in their newsletter, or maybe it's Social Selling News or something, like he's already signaled that like that he's not going to go after the industry, right? Like they've had positive talks. They feel positively about this new FTC administration. They obviously did not feel that way about Lena Khan. They did not feel that way about the rules she was making. So So you're right that leaving it to the vicissitudes of the FTC and the vicissitudes of a presidential administration has never worked, isn't working. And unfortunately with Trump, I think does have the potential to backfire totally, because I think Trump would love to unleash, the regulatory Wild West that MLM enjoys, what I call in my book, the post-regulation world on everything. So I think unfortunately we're going to a place where MLM, rather than rating MLM in, MLM is actually going to be the blueprint for all kinds of industries where it really shouldn't be, like healthcare or building houses. Like that's where we're going in terms of this deregulatory impulse. So I, I don't want to pick a side because I'm supposed to be objective, and that's my position as an outsider. But I think that strategic difference is very interesting and really important conversation, and that's why all those guys, I feel the same way about them as you do. And the fact that they were so open with me about the internal debate was great. And I think that it's really I appreciate that they were so candid with me about their different strategies. So
Yeah, I
not to
view
be too diplomatic, but yeah.
Yeah, I was surprised that you talked about it in the book. I've never talked about this like sort of rift publicly, but I mean the cat's sort of out of the bag with this book, and I was surprised that they were both open enough to talk about that in the book, because I sort of look at that as like, Magneto and Professor Xavier, like they're rivals but they're old friends. I sort of look at like Robert and Bill as that in in a way, which is
Yeah,
like,
and they were both, they're both really like, yeah, they have some maybe sharper words for each other, but I think they have a lot of respect, and they come at this wanting to change it and wanting to help. So I think they acknowledge, of course, that in each other. And I'm speaking at the conference on Thursday, so I'm definitely like an ally of both sides. And like I said, I think everybody has a job to do and a place to do. And I hope that like I've done a job. But like as a journalist, that's always really interesting in terms of like talking about the strategy. Like I said, like as an observer, that felt like a really important moment that we're in. And it feels a little make or break with Trump, honestly. So I think talking about the strategies became really important.
I think you have done something significant with this book, and I really appreciated this book, and more so, I appreciate the I guess cultural climate that we're in right now. That a major publisher, this is Penguin Random House, right? So this is like one of the biggest publishing houses, is willing to publish a book and has empowered you to say the things in here that are factual, that you say, that I think publishers and journalists alike have been scared to say for a long time because of the legal backlash that they fear. Obviously, it's a redundancy to ask because the book is coming out that you didn't have like pushback. You were enabled to do this, so I doubt that your publisher was like, Bridget, don't do this. But
We did a full fact check.
Yes.
So I stand behind every single claim in the book, and we went to all the companies, and
Yes.
none of them responded except one. So
Okay. Well, congrats on this book, and I don't know if I can ask you just as a last parting question, what do you hope to accomplish with the book?
the truth. I really just want people to know the truth, and I want to have been able to put the truth out there in what I discovered based on the evidence and analysis of my research. So not my truth emotionally or my truth in my how I feel, but the truth of what I discovered if after years of research and building on the years of research of people who've been looking at it a long time. And so I just want people to know the truth about multi-level marketing.
Awesome. Okay, well, the book is Little Bosses Everywhere. I will link in the description where you can buy it and where you can connect with Bridget. Bridget, thank you for chatting with me, and congrats again on the book.
Thanks so much, Marco.
Okay.